Hello, this is the Bureau of Lost Culture. The Bureau is dedicated to collecting and recollecting lost, half-remembered or forgotten countercultural stories. You can find out more about what we do at bureauoflostculture.com. I am Stephen Coates and I'm here with my comrade Paul Hartfield. And today I'd like to introduce our two guests. First of all, Dr. Sam Hutt.
Hello.
And second of all, Hank Wangford.
Hello.
Sam, welcome. The reason that you are here is that you were one of maybe lesser known but very significant figures in the Soho countercultural scene, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do, let's just back up the truck. Where are you from, and how did you get to be practicing as a doctor in central London in the 60s?
I was raised in Camden Town. Actually raised in a fantastic place called Regent's Park Terrace, which is really flash, and whose houses are probably worth about 15 million now. And my parents were communists.
Right.
Both my mum and dad serious communists. My dad was on the Central Committee of the British Communist Party and was the chief sub-editor of the Daily Worker and a newspaper designer, and became the president of the NUJ as well. I
have to jump in there straight away, is that's a very interesting combination of communist and living in Regent's Park Terrace. Do you want to explain that?
Yep. I know, it sounds like champagne socialists. When we moved into Regent's Park Terrace, it was the late 40s, and he got the freehold to it for 5,000 quid in 1952. So it wasn't that expensive a property, but I mean, it's just magnificent. And I remember as a kid, our next door neighbours were the Conrans, and then there were all sorts of intellectuals. Regent's Park Terrace runs along a street called Oval Road, and then behind it is a crescent called Gloucester Crescent.
Yeah, wonderful.
And Gloucester Crescent, Jonathan Miller, whom we'll hear more about later, his back garden abutted onto our back garden, and A.J. Eyre, who was a famous historian. There are loads of it was intellectuals, quite lefty.
The Camden sort of North London.
Camden North London thing, yeah. So I guess my dad lucked out getting Regent's Park Terrace, but still stayed firmly with the party, and that's a whole other story. In that. I was raised, therefore, in a communist family. My mum worked in the Soviet embassy teaching them English. And on the kitchen wall, we had a picture of Uncle Joe Stalin.
Wow.
And because the family was fairly unhappy and my mum had some affairs, and she had an affair with a very handsome Soviet commander at the embassy. And I always remember when I was about 4, him coming round and my mum saying, "Say hello to your Uncle Pyotr." "Oh, hello, Uncle Pyotr. Oh, you're handsome."
So let's just jump in there then. That's interesting, actually. Your mum was having an affair with her. So that's something from the Cold War, isn't it? But when you say, apart from the fact that your parents were communists, did that actually affect the way that you were brought up? I mean, life in the house. Was there something communist about it?
Oh, yeah, because you were raised to think, as everybody is, there are good people and bad people in the world. But for me, the good people were Russians and communists. The bad people were Americans and capitalists. Oh, and Catholics thrown in as well, because my mum came from Glasgow, and Glasgow is more sectarian than Northern Ireland, and they weren't religious at all. But if you're not religious, you're Protestant in Glasgow.
Yeah.
You're only Catholic if you're Catholic. So I remember being up in Glasgow a lot and being with my Auntie Jean and her talking about the McCartneys next door who were Catholic, all except Bill, the father, and talking about saying, "Oh, that Aggie, that we girl there, Aggie, oh, she's a good enough girl for a Catholic," and not meaning to put them down, but, that was in the mix. So in the 50s, which was my teen years at school, you were very much an outsider. And you didn't want people to find out that you came from a communist family, and they did find out, and then you got beaten up.
Yeah.
I get beaten up because I was a long, skinny geezer, so you're a long streak of piss,
Yeah, so. But in the 50s, but being a communist, was tantamount to sort of, being some sort of traitor, wasn't it? Really, because
not so much as under McCarthy in America.
Yeah,
but you were definitely out there. And my mum and dad approved of me going in the cadet force. Why? So I could learn to use a rifle for when the revolution came. So it really was.
They were preparing for revolution.
They were convinced it was going to happen, but they were very unhappy, and obviously my mum was unhappy. And then later she had an affair with one of Dad's colleagues on the Daily Worker, and that was a big scandal in the Communist Party. And when my brother Jim, was born when I was 11. They would normally have split up, they got divorced, but they stayed together, not for the sake of the children,
for the sake of the party. Yeah, that is good.
The party couldn't take it.
Yeah,
it's serious communist stuff. You have to stay together. The scandal will rock the party too much.
Right. So you came from a radical background, a radical London background, and so that theme's gone through your life, then, isn't it? So you went to medical school
to medical school. Always still feeling a bit of an outsider. So there's certain stages in my life where I always felt outside the mainstream, and that kind of, I think, affected choices later. So that when I went to Cambridge for university, I smoked my first spliff in Cambridge. Now, in 1960, to smoke a spliff was almost a political action. It wasn't every day. It was like nothing now, so what? But it was...
Because it was so rare to get it?
It was pretty rare, yeah. I smoked my first spliff with a man called Pete Jenner, who has become a very famous manager.
Manager of Pink Floyd.
Managed Pink Floyd, managed Ian Dury, managed Kevin Ayers, Soft Machine, The Clash.
So you were right in there at the beginning then. So when's this? This is 1960.
This is 1960, yeah. And through the early 60s, then you become part of the Alternative Society.
You qualified as a doctor?
Qualified as a doctor. I finished Cambridge, then I came down because at that point you couldn't do your clinical work in Cambridge. So I came down to St George's, which is at that point in Hyde Park Corner. And by that point, I had been living in Soho for quite a while. The first place I lived in Soho was Berwick Street, number 17, over Borovic, who were a kind of fabric place. And then I moved to Covent Garden, to Longacre, and that next place, and then the third place back in Soho, they were all hookers' flats. It had been hookers before I moved in.
Describe Soho at that time then, Sam. I mean, we're in Soho right now. It's got a certain kind of characteristic to it. Lots of people say that, it's not what it was. But I mean, what was it like then?
Well, it wasn't as commercialised at all, but nothing was as commercialised. Things were how they were. So it was seedy, dirty. It was a red light district.
Cheap
as chips. Full of, there were drugs because all the junkies would go down to Boots to get their prescriptions, their heroin and cocaine down at Boots in Piccadilly.
Tell us about that, because that's quite interesting. I mean, I know you get involved in that later on as well, but I mean, this was a time when if you were a junkie, you could get a prescription, could you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got really pure heroin and pure cocaine
from Boots.
From Boots, yeah. Well, after a prescription by certain doctors who would prescribe it. And by this point, I was living in this wonderful place called Industry Buildings, which is just behind where your other studio is in Broadwick Street. And it used to be a police section house, was the building that we were behind. Industry Buildings now long gone, and there's a car park there. But Industry Buildings was really interesting historically because that was built in the 19th century in Victorian times by an organisation called the Metropolitan Association for the Improvement of Dwellings for the Industrious Classes. And Dickens and Kingsley were on the board as philanthropists. And Lord Industry was obviously the man with the money. And he was a big mate of Dickens, Kingsley, Christopher Wren, all sorts of people. No, he wasn't. That was way before. And the point about Industry Buildings was it was the first, and this is all pre-Peabody buildings, the first building of its kind for the industrious classes, for working class people, with 2 lavatories in it, 2 water closets, because up to then you just threw your piss out of the window.
So 2 lavatories in the whole building?
In the whole building, yeah, for
sharing.
like 70 flats. But they were there.
Right.
So this was a radical move. And then
which must have been a relief for the people on the pavement as well.
It would have been a huge
chuck
relief
stuff
for
out the window.
And for that's where, just around the corner from where John Snow discovered cholera.
Right.
So no wonder there was cholera around, because there was piss and crap on the streets, and it was filthy. No, not when I lived there, because we had water closets.
You had your own toilet, in fact.
I had my own toilet, yeah, we had luxury.
Right.
And the place I lived in Industry Buildings, that was it wasn't just a hooker, it was a brothel. When they busted it, they watched it for 3, and in 3 hours, 64 guys went in there, and they had 4 girls working this place.
Right.
And the rooms were about the size of this. It was a tiny place. How they managed to do it, I don't know. Anyway, we moved in, and I was there for about 4 years.
Practicing as a doctor?
No, I was still a medical student then. So, and then I did my house job. So when I was on duty at George's on Hyde Park Corner, I was already a poser, so I had a white bicycle with a little red cross painted on the front. So I could actually be on call, say to my mates, look, if there's a cardiac arrest or something, you handle that, and say, yeah, sure, or call me. I could get from the flat in Soho on the bike to Hyde Park Corner in about 6 minutes. So I could be on call and get to the bedside in 6-7 minutes.
Wow.
On my white bicycle.
My white bike. Yeah.
And that was important, because of those times, and I can't believe it when I say it, but then, you think now of how overworked junior doctors are, but then the work schedule was you clock on Monday morning, right, and you are then on call 24 hours a day until Friday afternoon of the following week. So you are 12 days locked in there on call, going completely potty, making terrible mistakes because you are out of your mind with
fatigue.
And then Friday afternoon, you get away. So you come out and you go back home and you go completely mad for 2 days. And then Monday morning, you clock back in. So no wonder I arranged times that I could just slip off for a cup of tea with my wife and kid. I had a little boy then.
So you're living as a family in Soho, working like a devil, slaving away like a devil for the NHS down at St George's. Yeah. But how did you sort of migrate from that into what happened next? I mean, when you qualified, because then
before I answer that, I'd like to point out that my boy, who was born, and I delivered him on Christmas Day in Hyde Park. On Hyde Park Corner in George's, the gynaecologist allowed me to deliver him. His middle name is Soho. So he's Matthew Soho Hutt. So that he'd have Matt if he wants to be straight, so he can be Matt Hutt and be straight. But if he really wanted to be wacky, he could be Soho Hutt.
Soho Hutt. So you're firmly embedded in this part of town.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Then you qualify as a doctor, and then what happens next? Because that radical streak in you, which had sort of come maybe from your communist upbringing, it's sort of still there, isn't it? Actually. Well,
it's there too, yes. And because the point about saying you started to spliff up in 1960 was, you did feel part of an, in quotes, alternative society. I mean, we got full of ourselves and it was very overblown. But you did think that, you made terrible mistakes. You thought there's straight society and then there was us. And don't trust anybody who hasn't got long hair. That's the first mistake, So you only trusted people with long hair. There was a lot of people with long hair who were very untrustworthy, And equally, there were people with short hair who were trustworthy. So anyway, you felt part of an alternative, very, very much so. And then when acid came along, you really felt like that.
So when you say this alternative that you felt part of, which we could call the underground, the counterculture, was that a specific London thing, or was it that you felt connected to the people in America who were doing the same things? What was it? That feeling?
You felt connected with the people in America. You felt connected with the people on the continent. Yep. You felt connected with, like the Paris uprisings, the 1968 revolutions, the student stuff. All of that you were connected to.
There was been some breakthrough of consciousness in some way in the late 50s and early 60s with the Beats, and that was this kind of...
That's right, the Beats. So, as it happened, I met Burroughs and Brian Geisen, who were big Beats people, in 1961 when I first went to Morocco. And I went to Tangier and spent some time in Tangier.
Yeah, Burroughs was living, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So
I always loved the Burroughs. One of his lines was, "The true revolutionary wears a three-piece suit." Meaning you don't go round with a Che Guevara T-shirt and stuff if you really want to be a revolutionary. You look absolutely straight.
Well, his thing of L'Ombre Invisible as well, the Invisible Man, wasn't it? So
right.
when he lived in London, he lived in St James. So you feel part of this international counterculture, even if it's a bit up itself, but you're part of that.
Yeah.
The weed smoking's part of it, and then acid comes to London.
Yes, and then that completely shakes you down.
Do you remember your first trip?
Absolutely, because I took it with the man who was my best man when I got married. Little guy, also called Sam, very thoughtful, and we did it in a very reverential way. So reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Krishnamurti, preparing ourselves spiritually for about 3-4 days, almost fasting, brown rice and cleaning yourself out, being meditative and thinking. And this is in Kingston here, outside London, where he lived. And then doing it in a very, almost religious way, which was actually really good. I mean, I laugh at it because, again, it was a bit up itself, but it was a lovely way to do it. And with somebody who had done it before, and therefore you had somebody you could trust if the visions got a bit too harsh, which they didn't. It was absolutely glorious, and it was that whole thing that people talk about, getting in touch with God. One of the dangers of acid was that you would have visions that normally a hermit or a mystic would take 40 years to get to, and there'd be 40 years of preparation, and you do this without any preparation. So it's that fact that you open all the gates and whoosh, it all comes in, and you're not really ready for it. Particularly if you're doing it in a festival and you're surrounded by 100,000 other crazies, then you can really go potty. You can really have a bad trip.
Smash and grab rave on enlightenment. These days, some people call it.
But for me, it was wonderful. I absolutely loved it.
It wouldn't be kind of like allowed in a way for a doctor to be sort of experimenting with psychedelic drugs, and that it was just a different time, wasn't it?
Well, they might not talk about it,
okay,
but doctors are notorious drug takers. The doctors were always taking the pills and the stuff that they had. Apart from this extraordinary sort of mushrooming in the late 60s of mandrax, which was a sleeping pill, stuff called methaqualone, which is very odd. And we all took it, and it was a lot of fun. And luckily, it just got taken off the market because they realised it was being abused. And that was probably a great thing. It was called Quaaludes in the States.
So it's actually, you take an acid, that's kind of you open up even further, so you feel very much part of this kind of new consciousness, this new underground scene. Yeah. And then what do you do with that sort of knowledge, as it were? Did you started to put that into practice as part of your medical work in a way?
Well, you don't consciously put it into practice, but you've had these experiences, and they will affect your relations with people, reactions with people.
And you also started to work, with people in the counterculture as well, didn't you? I mean, in the 60s, you became one of the doctors who was actually actively working with people.
Absolutely. And I joined up with a man called Ian Dunbar, who was keen to help people off heroin. He was interested in working with junkies. I wasn't that interested because it's a really hard job, and you can't get anybody off heroin unless they want to get off heroin. You can kind of help them want to do it. But that's so with alcohol, that's so with all those addictive drugs. The person has got to want to do it, then you can help them. And he discovered at that time that we still could prescribe cannabis in tincture form. This is pre-1972, when it then became illegal for doctors to do that. And he gave junkies cannabis, and then all sorts of people cannabis. Well, junkies, he'd give them the cannabis because it was something to get high. It doesn't replace heroin. It's nothing like heroin. Heroin is more like alcohol than like cannabis. This whole idea of cannabis being a gateway drug, well, it's a gateway drug because it's illegal. So it puts you in the drug world. Alcohol is not illegal, so it doesn't put you in the drug world. But you see so many people I've known, so many rock stars I've known who've kind of moved from smack into alcohol, back to smack, alcohol. Because both smack and alcohol, you can get oblivion with both of those. You can't get oblivion with weed. It heightens things or makes you stupid, but you don't get oblivion.
So prescribing, say, a tincture of cannabis then for you was not actually anything to do with like feeding into that kind of hunger. It was more actually, well, these people, this is something which is going to possibly help, right?
Well, it's partly that, but it was also, as I said earlier, smoking a joint at that time was much more a political action. It was a radical action then than it is now. I mean, it's much more sensible now because it's smoking a joint. I'm still convinced it's far less dangerous than alcohol is. The whole skunk story that's the classic thing of doing something unnatural. Because however strong we would smoke, and we'd get, fantastic Nepalese hash and brilliant Thai sticks and all those, which were really strong, but it didn't have the psychotic effect of skunk at all.
So for you, and also prescribing that to people was also a radical act.
It was a radical act.
Political act, right?
It was a political act, yes. For me, because I was one of the signatories, the Beatles paid for that famous or infamous full-page ad in the Times, which said the law against marijuana is immoral in principle and unworkable in practice. And they got about 50 people to sign it, including Watson and Crick, the Nobel Prize winners, and all sorts of people. And I was one of the signatories. And I still believe it, that. So that by prescribing cannabis, because I could, partly we weren't getting paid much by the NHS. We got our first paycheck after 6 months of doing a general practice, a registered general practice on Ladbroke Grove for £11 and 10p. And that's for 3 doctors for 6 months. So we did private prescriptions for £2 for cannabis. And it was absolutely Israel. Police really didn't like us. We lasted just over 15 months, and the police found, there's trouble with the drains in this building, got to close you down. They couldn't wait to close us down.
And you had presumably quite a big patient list then.
Oh, yeah, sure. Hey, we can go down to the doctor and we can get... Because, you come to see me, you tell me, amongst other things, your worries and your anxieties, is that you smoke dope. Well, you're a criminal. So you've got all that anxiety on top of what other anxieties you have, that you are a criminal and you could be locked up. And I've been locked up, nice middle-class people or working-class people get locked up for weed, crazy. Black guys getting locked up for weed. It's crazy. So if I give it to you, you don't have to be illegal anymore. Phew.
And you don't feel anxious.
And you don't feel anxious.
It's a win-win situation.
Yeah. Mind you have to be very careful with particularly the extract, which was like kind of psychedelic marmite.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because right now we're actually in this position. I personally regard the drug policy in this country as completely ludicrous, because it's not based on harm. But we're in a position now when medical cannabis is back on the menu, isn't it? It's just starting to be,
But what doctors will prescribe it?
Very few at the moment.
About 3,
But how many of you were there in London who were doing
there were only the 3 of us,
right?
And we were the ones responsible for them to make it illegal. We tipped the balance. Hooray!
Dang.
Dang.
You, goddamn you.
So Sam, tell us about. So apart from the prescribing the cannabis in tincture form, which actually we were talking to Jenny Fabian about, and she said it was not.
It wasn't what you wanted it to be.
It wasn't what you wanted it. You felt a bit woozy and dreamy and stuff like that.
It was heavy,
quite heavy.
Yeah.
But tell us about. So the other big theme of your life, of course, is music, and we're going to come into that a lot more later. But already you're also involved with musicians in the music world as well. Tell us about that a bit.
Well, because we were, really, we were a hippie clinic, and you could say anything you like, because I was another hippie with hair down to my shoulders, so that if you wanted to come in, and the same thing happened later when we got closed down, and by that time I was living down in Exhibition Road with Jenny and with Roger Chapman, the lead singer with Family, and that's where I went on practicing while I went down the road to study homeopathy as well, because I was really interested in that. And my teacher was the Queen's homeopath, this wonderful old lady called Marjorie Blackie. So she was down in South Ken, we were up in Exhibition Road, and I was giving people homeopathic remedies. And but I was private. I had to be, because I wasn't on the National Health then, because we got chucked out. So I was very uncomfortable about that.
So you got kicked out of the National Health?
Well, the practice got closed, and I had no interest in working in a normal general practice. The great thing about that was we did what we liked. It was a hippie clinic, partly for Ian to look after the junkies. And I looked after some junkies too. And he'd stumbled across a method of coming off heroin, which makes it incredibly easy.
Tell us. I mean, not
No. It's interesting because it never penetrated medical thinking in a large way. It's for travellers' diet. Lomotil, right? It's a synthetic opiate. And basically a man called Yudkin, I think, who was a physiologist and pharmacologist, discovered that if you took enormous doses of Lomotil, it doesn't get you high or anything, but it replaces the opiate craving. So you would take somebody through 5 days of decreasing amounts of Lomotil, and they'd get through their withdrawal from heroin without the snuffles, the flu, the shakes, the aches, all the agony of coming off in cold turkey. So
Ian was pioneering that as a sort
he was pioneering that and using that, and then giving cannabis for something to get high off. Jenny was quite right. It wasn't right like smoking a spliff. You had to be very careful because you could OD very easily if you eat it. Which is so anyway. If you eat dope, if you eat a brownie or something like that, it's not as easy to
regulate
as when you're smoking it. But the trouble with smoking is bad for your lungs.
So you guys have got this radical hippie practice.
Yeah.
We get shut down. Of course, the authorities are going to hate that, right? So they close that down, and you said that. Maybe
so I go on practicing, and because a lot of musicians came to see us for the thing, they followed me. So there I am in Montrose Court doing a private practice, and a lot of rock stars would come to see me.
What?
Well, if they came to see me because they wanted uppers or downers, I say, sorry, mate, I'm not a grocer. You want to go and see the straight-looking guys who are in Wimpole Street or Harley Street with the three-piece suits. They'll give you loads of amphetamine. They'll give you loads of speed. They'll give you loads of downers, whatever you like. But me, I'm out of it. All I'm interested in is giving you healthy things. The only drug I'll give you is cannabis, But the rest of it, or Lomotil, to get you off heroin.
Right, so the impression has sort of sneaked out that you, sort of Dr. Sam Hutt, because you had this hippie clinic, is that, you can maybe go there and get something to kind of bend your mind, but in fact you're actually not interested in that.
No. I
mean the private practice on Wimpole Street, or is where you can go and sort of write a check for 25 quid and they'll say, you need some slimming pills or something. So right. You're homeopathic, healthy treatments, but you start to gather this reputation for that, right?
Yeah, you do, and people are very pleased because the homeopathy fits in also with the kind of the macrobiotics, the healthy food, the vegetarianism, the all that. Wow, homeopathy. Oh wow, that's far out, man. Yeah. And it was far out. I mean, I loved it. I loved it intellectually. I find a lot of it very difficult to defend now, because there's certain concepts in homeopathy which are pretty indefensible. But the idea, the basic idea of like curing like, was a really good and interesting thing. So now I was a doctor, I was interested in getting people well. I was also disliked being a private doctor, and I also loved the ancient Chinese method, which was that you have a doctor who you pay while you're well. Then as soon as you get ill, you stop paying the doctor until the doctor gets you better again. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's the way. Instead of the American style, which is, how's business? It's great. They're all as sick as hell. Brilliant. You know?
So you start to, I mean, you know, you become the rock and roll doctor in some ways, don't you, in the 60s and stuff. So tell us more about that then. And of course, you know, because of course you've also got this passion for music yourself. What sort of music were you listening to and loving at that time?
Well, I was raised on sort of soul music. And so if we go back to the early times, even when I was in Cambridge before I'd moved to Soho, I was running a PX business, which was buying cigarettes and alcohol from an American airman who would collect all the vouchers from his mates who didn't want their PX. They're cheap. You know, you get 200 fags for a quid, and a 40-ounce bottle of vodka or bourbon for a quid. And Gary would come there, charge me a quid for them, and then I'd sell them to my mates for 30 bob. You know, so I had a good business going there, and he was very hip. He was mega cool black airman with an MG, and then come the weekend, we'd both go down to London and go to the Flamingo. And the Flamingo was
just down the road.
Just down the road. And it was the number one place for R&B. It was fantastic, and it would start at midnight, and you'd have two bands playing from midnight to 6 o'clock. So each band would play 3 one-hour sets, you know, 12 to 1, then the next band would come 1 to 2, then you go back 2 to 3, then the next one would go 3 to 4, then you go back 4 to 5. And they were fantastic bands. It was the house bands were Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames, Chris Farlow and the Thunderbirds, Herbie Goins and the Night Timers, and then you'd get guests to come in. I saw Solomon Burke there, who was unbelievable. But they were all unbelievable. It was fantastic music. And the audience was basically, like my mate Gary, was black American airmen, you know, who'd come down, white women, a lot of whom were hookers, and then Spotty Herberts like me, you know, young white guys who loved R&B, you know.
That's strange timing for 12 till 6. So that was a drug-based thing, not an alcohol-based thing.
No, that was all based on speed as well.
Right,
So it was great when regularly it was run by these two dodgy geezers, Jeff Kruger, the Kruger brothers. And suddenly, you know, in the middle of a song, one of the Krugers would come up on stage, grab the mic, stop the band playing. All right, lads, meet Van's outside. Stay cool, right? And you'd hear this kind of noise as everybody's dropping all their pills out their pockets onto the ground. So all these amphetamines would go falling on the ground. And then this pathetic line of uniformed policemen would come snaking through, going crunch, crunch, crunch on all the speed pills. And they'd pick somebody at random, some sort of poor bugger, and take him off. And then Kruger would come back and say, OK, you know, all right, back you go. And
the dealers could pop out and say, oh, you're more drugs.
Oh, yeah.
So that was early 60s.
So that was early, that was early 60s. And it was fantastic music. It was just wonderful music. Solomon Burke, that was a little later. He came about 64. Huge, I don't know if you've ever seen him, big man. I mean, in his later years, he had to sit on a throne on stage because he couldn't stand up. He was so fat. But when I saw him, he was just sort of
very large,
very fat, but not sitting down fat. And he called himself the King of Rock and Soul, and he'd come on with a crown, right, an ermine-trimmed purple cape, which he'd fling off and reveal he's wearing a salmon pink lurex suit with emerald lurex lapels. I mean, you know, fantastic, and sweated like mad. And I always remember he's up on stage and just doing the business with Geordie Fame backing him, just brilliant. And there's this little black girl standing on the chairs behind me. You might have to cut this. Standing on the chairs behind me, just screaming at this great sort of wallowing, blubbery geezer singing. She's screaming, "Fuck me, fuck me, fuck me."
And did he?
Who knows, mate? Who knows? Who knows if she got to him?
So let's keep on that theme. So we're in this heady mix of drugs, sex, and music in Soho and central London, right? And you're, as it were, up to your elbows in it because you're also a practicing as a gynaecologist. Or did that come later?
No, that's way later.
Okay.
At that point, I'm still at first. When I first went down, I was still a student, an undergrad at Cambridge, and then I'm a medical student, so I'm still going down to the Flamingo. I went up the Roaring Twenties a bit, but that wasn't my scene. It was the Flamingo, and then there was the third of the three all-night places in the early '60s was Count Suckle's Q Club, which was a sort of a pre-reggae, a blue beat club up in Paddington.
Count Suckle's Q Club.
I've never heard of that.
Paul.
Yep, gonna look it up.
So, it's amazing times, and not just through rose-tinted glasses, because it is this kind of strange melting pot, isn't it? All this stuff happening at once.
Very raw. It's all really raw,
And as we've talked before with various people, Soho's a cheap place to live. It's pretty scuzzy. As nobody owned very much, but it didn't matter. You didn't really need to.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of like perfect kind of breeding ground for this countercultural thing going on. All the drugs coming from America and all that sort of stuff. It's all mixing up together, isn't it? In this kind of ferment of stuff. And then you start to hang out with people who became very famous rock stars. I mean, didn't you help deliver Keith Richards' baby?
I didn't help deliver him. I delivered my own baby, but no, I helped Keith when he and Anita's little boy, Marlon, was poorly, so they called me down and I went and doctored him, that was fine. And Pete Townsend, and at that point, because I knew Pete, and I'd done some doctoring for him. Again, nothing to do with drugs, because I was really quite puritanical about that. The only drug that I would give you would be cannabis, and everything else it's just medicine. I'm not here to do the rest of it.
And then also doing music. Didn't you start to write and record in the 60s? I think we're going to hear.
Well,
something.
I did, and I was, because of my involvement with Pete Jenner, I was going to do a Syd Barrett song, right?
A song for Syd Barrett?
No, one of Syd's songs.
Okay.
I was going to do a cover of one of Syd's songs. But that never happened. And at that point, I was setting a lot of Lewis Carroll poems to music because the words I was writing were pretty rubbish. My lyrics were very, very bad. And I can say that. And then here's these wonderful, mad poems that Lewis Carroll wrote. I mean, really potty, but fitted perfectly into the counterculture because they are all kind of hallucinatory and weird. And you wonder, did he have a bite of that mushroom? What was Lewis up to, apart from ogling Alice in a very non-PC way? So they fitted perfectly, things like Jabberwock, Which Dreamed It. So I set music to all these different poems. So we decided to do Jabberwock, and Pete facilitated that. And because he had been looking after Mark Bolan, and he knew Tony Visconti, Tony Visconti came and was the producer, and we went in with a band called Junior's Eyes and recorded these two tracks.
I think we should hear one of them. Here we go.
The Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the chop, bird and shun, the frumiest bandersnatch. The brillig and the slithy toasted gyre and gimble in the wable mimsy were the borogroves and the mome rats outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware, the chop, bird and shark, the frumiest bandersnatch. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the chop, bird and shark, the frumiest bandersnatch. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through his mortal blade went snick-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he came galumphing back. Galump, galump, galump. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the chop, bird and shark, the frumiest bandersnatch. And have you slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, rapture, say, halloo, hooray, eat your soul with his joy. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the chop, bird and shark, the filmiest bandersnatch.
That's the Jabberwock, Boeing Devine and the Beautiful Soup. You know, for listeners, there's a picture of Sam on the back of this from the 7-inch single, and he's looking well cool. He's sitting sort of cross-legged. I think he's got a pair of velvet pantaloons on and a paisley shirt and a wicked moustache. And he's playing a sitar.
Yeah.
I mean, and this has been voted, Sam, you said one of the top 100 psychedelic singles of all time.
It is one of the top 100 psychedelic singles of all time, yeah.
So were you tempted at that point thinking, I'm going to give up this medical stuff, I'm just going to go for full-on psychedelic pop stardom?
I did. There was another band called the Third Ear Band,
yeah,
who were seriously wacky. They were kind of a cross between Floyd and Hangman's Beautiful Daughter. What were they? Very, very organic. It'll come back to me. Another group. Anyway, Third Ear Band. I did a gig at the Royal Festival Hall playing sitar with the Third Ear Band.
Oh man! So you were a proper sitar player at that point.
With John Peel introducing.
You're a self-taught sitar player, was it?
No, I studied with a wonderful man called Imrat Khan. Imrat Khan was the younger brother of Vilayat Khan, and Vilayat Khan was the greatest sitar player. He was really the king. Ravi Shankar was a great sitar player, but he was the handsome boy who became the kind of the star with the counterculture. He was the good-looking guy who went out there and fathered Nora.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned Barrett and Pete Jenner there earlier. Do you remember which Barrett song it was you were thinking of covering, out of interest?
I was a mouse in a little house.
Bike.
Yeah.
There was another side to all this, wasn't there? There was another side to the kind of the beautiful summer of love, psychedelia, the happiness and all that stuff, which was epitomised in some way by Barrett, wasn't it? And other people the dark underside of it, where it was all starting to go a bit wrong. I mean, you must have also been dealing as a doctor with some of that, were you?
Well, because I was big mates, I was the Pink Floyd's doctor, because I'd qualified by that time. And there was a time when I was living down in Formentera, off Ibiza. I sort of swung between Ibiza and Formentera, and I had a finca in Formentera, and Syd and Roger came down for a couple of weeks with the idea from Pete and Andrew that it would be a kind of a rest cure with me. But Syd was at the height of the craziness, and he, there were times where he was literally climbing up the wall.
Really?
And just going crazy. And I was there at their last... his last recording session with the Floyd, where he recorded Vegetable Man and Jug Band Blues, which were both pretty psychotic. In my pink shirt, I feel like a jerk, and that's why I am Vegetable Man. And a real cry for help, and It was awful.
So when he came to see you, and you were sort of taking a sabbatical in Formentera, were you?
Well, at that point I'd work for a bit, and then I'd go down for 6 months and just live in Formentera and think and play my sitar.
Play your sitar, sounds heavenly.
Sounds great.
So Rick Wright and Barrett came over with the idea that you, in some way, with your medical
they thought
health,
it would help, but no, it didn't. Syd was very sensitive, fantastically good looking, really pretty boy, but really sensitive. And he did he chucked it down himself. He took acid every day for at least 2 years. Now, to be in that world day after day after day after day, that's too much. That's crazy stuff. Yeah. So I'm not at all surprised that he did fall off the edge.
You couldn't help him? No,
he was too far gone then. And he couldn't cope with the commercial side of it, which people like Roger were much stronger. They could do it. Rick Wright kind of hung on with it, and Nick played the drums. He just bashed the drums.
Did you ever see him again after Formentera, Syd?
Yeah, a couple of times, but then not after he went back to Cambridge. I never saw his kind of transmogrification into a fat bald man from this Adonis, this pretty boy.
Would you have known if there were mental health issues before the drugs, or did you see anything that was?
No, just an oversensitive. Well, over's a value judgment, but as very sensitive. Personality issues rather than mental health issues.
Okay.
But kind of incipient stuff there, which you can understand that doing that amount of acid is just not a good idea.
It's probably time that we hear another tune. And that tune is called Two Stubborn People.
I say stop, you say go. I say yes, you say no. Two stubborn people, too much in love to say goodbye. You blame me, I blame you. We're so busy blaming we can't see that we're through. We're two stubborn people, too much in love to say goodbye. We're so foolish, hanging on. We can see that love is gone. Won't admit our time is through, 'cause I love me and you love you. Love is blind, that's for sure. Even when love lies bleeding on the floor, we're two stubborn people, too much in love to say goodbye. We keep on living out the lie, too much in love to say goodbye.
That was Two Stubborn People, recorded here live today at Soho Radio with a certain Hank Wangford, who we're going to speak to now. Hank, tell us about that tune.
That tune, Two Stubborn People. Well, I was playing that on an instrument called a baritone ukulele, which, when I got it, I was very pleased I got it. I got it in Maui, because my son lives in California, or my first son, and so they can go over to Hawaii quite easily. So I went over with him once. And I got this baritone uke because he'd already got me a tenor uke, which I've worked on for a long time. And I fell out of love with the baritone uke because it was it's halfway in between a guitar and a ukulele, and I sort of felt like it was a nowhere instrument.
It's lovely though.
It is lovely.
Also,
Now
you told me
I know.
earlier that it actually writes songs for you. I'm going to rent it off you.
Well, you write songs on the piano mostly. If I write songs on piano, they come out really quite slow and quite hippie.
So what I do, mine do too, but they put them into the computer and I just turn the tempo up.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, well, that would work
Easy.
too.
It's that easy.
Oh,
but
man.
no, the observant listener may have thinking, God, Hank Wangford sounds exactly like Sam Hutt. Well spotted, because of course Hank Wangford and Sam Hutt share the same body.
We do share the same crumbling body, indeed.
Sam Hutt, doctor, rock and roll doctor, recording music, part of the music scene, part of the countercultural scene, has always got this love of music. And then something happened in 1969.
Well, something happened in 69, yes, was that of all the rock stars or music stars that came to me, a man called Graham Parsons, who has become a bit of a god to the country and country rock community, came up with his wife. His wife was poorly and he wanted me to see her. And he'd been hanging around with Keith Richards, taking industrial quantities of heroin. And because Graham was a poor little rich boy, and Keith always said Graham had better quality heroin than I ever got hold of. So they were big brothers in arms. They loved it. And Graham turned Keith on to country music. So all those songs like Honky Tonk Women, Dear Doctor, Dead Flowers, they're all country songs, essentially. So Keith got really turned on to country like that. And because I'd seen Keith's son Marlon as a baby, Keith sent Graham up to me. So I'm in the flat I'm sharing with Jenny Fabian and Roger Chapman. On the record player, I'm playing a guy called Fred Neil. Now, Fred Neil was a guitar player, folky, who hung around the village in New York, had this lovely baritone voice, and is known for two songs that became famous. One is called The Dolphins. And Fred Neil was one of those people who was, out there. Very few people knew Fred Neil. Now, Stephen, you must have known people or had somebody you really liked. And then if you met somebody else who knew this person, it'd be a mixture of emotions. Yeah. You'd be happy. Oh, you know Fred Neil too. And it'd also be kind of, get off my turf.
Of course, yeah.
So Graham comes in, Freddie Neil's playing on and Graham's first words were, "Hey, that's Freddie Neil." I say, "How do you know Freddie Neil?" He said, "Well, I played with him." "You played with Fred Neil?" He said, I said, "What's your name?" He says, "Graham Parsons." I go, "Jesus Christ."
So you knew who Graham Parsons was?
Oh, yeah, because I was, at that point, I was beginning to listen to the Flying Burrito Brothers, who fooled us into thinking that they were a rock and roll mentality, but they were playing real country music. Now, before that, when Graham joined a band called The Byrds, and they came out with what is now a classic album called Sweetheart of the Rodeo, I thought it was crap. I hated Sweetheart of the Rodeo. What's all this country rubbish? Because, remember,
you're a rock and roller.
I was an R&B boy, Yeah. Ray Charles was my first big hero, and then it all went into Otis and all that. What is this country stuff? And I loved the Byrds and I loved their harmonies. And the previous album they'd done before that was called Younger Than Yesterday, right? So seriously psychedelic with lots of backwards tapes and sort of acid kind of sounds and everything. And then suddenly there's this country rubbish. So I didn't appreciate Graham on that at all. But when they came out with Flying Burrito Brothers, it did have this aura of rock and rollness.
And of course, he looked...
Oh, he looked fantastic.
Another gorgeous sort of Adonis.
They had these nudie suits. Nudie was the guy who dressed all the country stars, but with rhinestones on all the suits. But instead of wagon wheels and cowboy images, he had marijuana leaves and pills and acid pills and stuff all over it.
So, can you remember what he looked like when he walked into your flat in exhibition?
He was wearing probably an extremely expensive buckskin jacket, fringed buckskin jacket, and he was a good-looking boy.
What did you do for him?
Well, I did. I just looked after his wife, who had a minor problem, and that wasn't a problem. But during all that, he then picked up, after the How Do You Know Fred Neil, he picked up my guitar and sang this song, which is a George Jones song, which goes, "The jukebox is playing a honky-tonk song, one more I keep saying, and then I'll go home. What good will it do me? I know what I'll find. An empty bottle, a broken heart, and you're still on my mind." You know, which is deep honky-tonk misery. And as soon as I heard that, that was my road to Damascus. That was my conversion. I could see there's soul in that music. It isn't the rubbish I thought it was.
And also, I've got Graham Parsons sitting in my living room playing it to me.
Playing it to me, yeah. And that was it. Mm-hmm. And so then we knew each other for a good few months. He went back to America, and then he came back, and he was going to produce an album that I was going to do with him and Rick Gretsch, who had been with Family, the bass player with Family, and then was with Blind Faith. But unfortunately, Rick was in the arms of Smack as well, and we went out to his house, and Graham and he just sort of disappeared off into sort of heroin dreams, and I was very much an outsider for that. Yeah, right. And so the album never happened. Right. But we had a lot of time with him singing me songs, and he was really my teacher, because he loved George Jones. That was my first love in country. Yeah.
Just a little aside, where are they getting the heroin from? I mean, you know, something like Graham Parsons comes over, he's not even a local. I mean, how did he do it? Who was supplying them with all that stuff?
If you're in that world, you find out. You know, I don't know how, because I'm not a junkie. But you find out. You find out pretty quickly.
I mean, Keith Richards has survived it, hasn't he? But I mean, there's not that many people with access to that kind of money and that kind of drugs that did survive it. Graham Parsons obviously didn't.
He didn't know, and there were various times that I was called over to see him, and he'd be turning blue, you know, or have a needle hanging out of his arm, and you know, on the way out. And I managed to get there in time to give him naloxone, give him the antidote to keep him breathing and bring him back. But in the end, yes, in Joshua Tree, he managed to take downers and alcohol and heroin, and that did for him.
But skipping back to you, and you come from R&B, psychedelic music. Now you've been turned on to country soul, let's put it that way. How did you, Sam Hutt, was turn into Hank Wangford?
Now, how did I turn into Hank? Well, it was a simple story. It was my girlfriend that I adored wanted to have kids, and I didn't want to have kids. So then one day, it turns out, I go to America to see my ex-wife and see Matt, see my son, who's been raised in America. And Lindsay comes over for 10 days while I'm there and presents me with a kind of ultimatum. Are you sure you don't want to have kids? Yeah, I'm sure I don't want to have kids. So she goes back home. When I get back to England, I find she's gone and married my flatmate because he obviously said, yeah, sure, we'll have kids. So as far as I was concerned, the world is a bastard, and them bastards have stabbed me in the back, and you know, and I'm suffering, and the world is a bad place, and it's all done it to me, which is a kind of human thing that you do. But of course, it's wrong. They didn't do it to you. You did it to you. Of course, you did. You had put that construct. So. I'm sitting in a pub in a place called Wangford in Suffolk, and I'm staring at my pint, thinking, you know, the world, it's all against me, oh, bloody bastards, oh no. And I'm raising my pint, and I suddenly think, Hank Wangford, what a great name for the ultimate wanker. What a great name for somebody who thinks that the world has done him in, and he blames it all on the world, and he can't see that it's him. Hank Wangford, great. So I tell all my mates. A month later, the Bungay May Horse Fair, which is a mixture of hippies, travelling folk, diddy-coys, dogs, horses, I'm going up on stage as Hank Wangford, saying, how can I get on stage with a name as monumentally stupid as Hank Wangford? But I did, with a couple of can girls as backing singers, and a drummer. No bass player, no nothing else. And there was a bass player in the audience who then joined, and then we formed a band. And
What year?
76.
I think it's time that we hear a Hank Wangford song. Another one recorded earlier in Soho Studios.
Perfect day, sky is blue, all set up for an I love you, but something's missing. That something is you. You decided the other day to break it up, throw it all away. Now something's missing. That something is you. You made something out of nothing on the day that we met. You filled my heart with fire, something I will never forget. The way you put that fire out only shows that nothing is forever and anything goes. Day's still perfect, sky's still blue, I'm still perfectly lonesome too. Something's missing, that something is you. Trombone solo. You made something out of nothing on the day that we met. You filled my heart with fire, something I will never forget. The way you put that fire out only shows that nothing is forever and anything goes. Now, day's still perfect, sky's still blue, I'm still perfectly lonesome too. Something's missing, that something is you. That something is you. That something is you.
Perfect Day, Hank. Tell us
Perfect
about
Day.
that.
Yeah, well, that's one of like Two Stubborn People. That's two of the songs from the new album, so they're still being done. We haven't finished the album yet, but it should be out in the autumn. We've pretty much done it. We just got a couple of things, and then we can mix it all.
And Hank's had an illustrious recording career with many albums and tours all over the place. And actually, in some ways, Sam Hutt really came into his own, didn't he, with becoming Hank Wangford? I mean, Sam Hutt's still there, and you carried on practicing as a doctor, a gynecologist, and all that stuff. But you really found it, didn't you, with Hank?
Well, I found it with country and with Hank, yeah.
What's quite interesting as well is that you have still got this radical thing going on, haven't you? Because actually, during the 80s, didn't you get involved with the whole kind of political response to Margaret Thatcher and all that stuff? You became part of that as well, didn't you?
Yeah, and Red Wedge.
Right. Tell us about that.
Well, Billy was part of
Billy Bragg.
Billy Bragg was part of Pete Jenner's stable, and so we played together. We recorded some songs together. And yeah, sure. Well, coming from a communist background, I may never have joined the Communist Party because of that whole sort of madness of my unhappy family staying together for the 5 years of my teens when they should have split up long before. Of course, I'm a lefty.
Thanks very much, Hank Wangford and Dr. Sam Hutt.
was a dreamer. Once upon a time, thought fairy tales come true. Then you crashed into my life, smashed into my heart, trashed into my dreams. Left the fairies telling tales on you. Once upon a time, we sang love songs. Once upon a time, thought we pulled through. I was the fool who thought that fairy tales come true. Once upon a time, I loved you. Yeah, once upon a time, I loved you.
That was Once Upon a Time by Hank Wangford. You can find out more about Hank and his music at hankwangford.com. This was the Bureau of Lost Culture. You can find out more about us and listen to other strange, half-remembered, half-forgotten countercultural stories at bureauoflostculture.com.